There are helpers in the sky when we need them most. We're talking to air traffic controllers today in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode is brought to you by Wingfield Aviation. With us today, we've got some pretty awesome air traffic controllers. We've got Scott, Matt, and Rob. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here. No problem.
The first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is not all air traffic control is the same, is it?
No.
Okay, well, let's just jump right into that. So we've got tower controllers, TRACON, center. What is all of this?
Well, I would say the tower guys get the good view, and then everybody looks the same to me, just behind a radar scope.
Gotcha.
Yeah, tower, well, from the ground up. Did you do tower?
I was an en route controller.
Okay, so the whole time? Awesome.
time.
Okay, so from the tower, yeah, we get a good view. You know, we control a smaller portion of airspace, control runways, so surfaces and stuff. And we do clearances as well, but compared to like the center and radar environment, yeah, the biggest difference is the airspace and the windows.
Okay, so what's it like to be, you're in center, correct?
Right.
All right, so let's just go through the process for a second, so that way our viewership can understand how air traffic is passed off from one controller to the next. So we've obviously got Matt, who's in the tower. He gives clearances and the airplane takes off. What happens from there?
Well, it depends on if they're VFR, the IFR, flight following, speaking from a local perspective at Meacham. If they're just VFR and they just want to go on 1200 squawk code VFR, then as long as I don't have any other traffic, it's, resume on navigation, or you can proceed on course or
Have a good flight.
have a good flight,
Yeah, okay.
until they're about to exit my airspace or enter someone else's. So we have Navy right next door to us.
Okay.
So if anybody goes west, we like to ship them early to Navy just in case. And then we have Alliance to the north, and that's normal. So flight following, what we'll do is we'll give them the squawk code, we'll tell them to stay out of the Bravo and the departure frequency, and then they'll read all that back. And once they depart and they tag up on our radar screen, assuming there's no traffic, we may give them the same spiel, proceed on course, resume on navigation, whatever. Or if we have traffic in the way or something, we may just continue upwind and contact departure.
Okay.
And then they'll turn them on course. So for IFRs, we have to actually request a release from the TRACON, so regional approach. And how we do that is we have on our radar screen, we have a little, we have a screen, we have a keyboard, and the keyboard we get on there, we put the squawk code in, and we press enter, and it flashes on our screen. This is requesting a release, an IFR release. So whenever you're on the ground and they're like, oh, the tower holds me all day. No, it's not the tower when you're on IFR.
I definitely blame you.
Well,
Always blame the tower.
that happens sometimes. But anyways, when it steadies green, that's our release, and we can clear the IFR for takeoff. In this area, most of them are going to get runway heading in 3,000. Unless the radar approach controller has something else going on. They're like, hey, I need you to turn this guy or whatever. 99% of the time it's runway in 3. We clear them for takeoff. They go. We make sure that they stay runway heading, which it was windy the other day, so this happened a lot. And
Right.
so we were just making sure. I know the wind will put you off course a little bit.
Right, because heading and ground track are two different things.
Correct.
So,
So, and then once they tag up, it's contact regional departure.
okay.
And that's it.
So
When they transition to the radar.
we don't have a departure or a controller here right now. We have center, and then you were en route, so you were
So
also.
we're headset in the center environment, but I've managed towers and the approach control in this area as
There
well.
you go,
So-
okay.
So I can tell you a little bit about that. So when the airplane comes over from the tower, the airplane's radar identified and moved from sector to sector as they move across the airspace, whether they exit vertically or laterally. They separate them as they move through the airspace and on course, and eventually there's an automated handoff that goes from the approach control to the en route center, and then the frequency change is made from there, and then they go to the center to talk to
Gotcha.
Scott.
And center is like the big, neighborhoods in the sky, basically, right?
Yeah, yes.
So like approach control, so we've got tower, which is incredibly local, and then we've got approach control or departure, depending on how you look at it, and they're more centric. So they're like DFW airspace. But then we've got Fort Worth Center. I mean, I talk to Fort Worth Center when I go to Oklahoma City.
Yeah, tower's got about 5 miles. The regional approach has maybe 60 miles, and then we have about 150,000 square miles.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot more of you guys, I'm assuming.
Yeah. There's in my facility, there's a little over 300 controllers. Just in Fort Worth Center, there's 22 centers, is that right?
Yeah, 21 domestic centers in the
21,
United
yeah.
States, and then we also control through an association with the International Civil Aviation, or ICAO. who delegates airspace around the world, the United States controls almost 70% of the world's surface,
Wow. I did not know that. That is actually really cool.
primarily Pacific and Atlantic Oceans is where a lot
Okay,
of that comes
yeah,
from.
that'll do it. So I want to get to know you guys a little bit better in your histories, because I want our audience to learn what it's like to be an air traffic controller, but how to become an air traffic controller. This is a true story. My 7-year-old son, Mitchell, I think he wants to be an air traffic controller when he grows up. I have tried to get that boy interested in aviation, and he loves airplanes. He likes the idea of airplanes, but he doesn't like to fly, at least not right now. He is obsessed with towers. He loves drawing them and talking about them and telling people what to do and where to go.
That's
So-
the best part of the job.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is.
I'm assuming all of you guys have wanted to be air traffic controllers since you were young.
No.
All right, well, let's talk about that. When did you decide to be an air traffic controller?
For me, it was actually when I was doing all my pilot training. I was very scared about.
So you're also a pilot?
Yes, yeah, pilot
Okay.
on the side. So
And we know Matt's also a pilot. And Rob, we've learned.
Had a private at one point, no longer current.
There you go. Okay.
yeah, no, just really scared to talk on the radios. Didn't understand, what air traffic was and what they did. And my instructors always tell me all these different ways that I could, mess up and lose my license and that sort of stuff. So I started taking ATC classes I was going to Embry-Riddle at the time, and
Just to learn about it. You just wanted to learn how to better communicate with
just
ATC.
to figure out
That's incredible.
what it's all about and what I need to be doing. And then I was like, wait, I really like this. I mean, not that I don't like flying, but I really like this a whole lot more. And just kind of went that course.
That is really cool. How long have you been an air traffic controller now?
9 years now.
Wow. Okay. What about you, Matt?
I think I decided early on that I wanted to be a tower controller. I grew up in Houston, so every time I went to Bush Intercontinental, I was just sitting there staring at the tower, and less of the airplanes, but I don't know, it's been in my head ever since I was a kid. So once I got old enough and, I was married, and then my dad's like, hey, you should go do something, the Air Force. And so I jumped into the Air Force, and I was Air Traffic Air Force for 6.5 years out in Florida at Tyndall Air Force Base. And in 2014, I'm like, being a controller is cool. Pilot as well would be awesome as well. So I went in and got my pilot's license when I was over there, and I also got my IFR while I was in. And I transitioned down to Houston shortly after the Air Force, and 9 months after that, I came up here to Meacham and continuing on education on both sides.
Now, were you able to choose air traffic control when you went into the Air Force?
They initially told me no, but my dad at the time knew the chief that was in charge of all that, and he kind of broke it down to me and said, hey, listen, you don't have to sign anything you don't want to, but this is what they're going to give you. So what I basically did is they made me pick a list of jobs, what they normally do. Air traffic was at the top, and then I picked something else. I don't remember what it was. And they said, when I get a contract for this one, let me know, because I'm not going to sign anything else. And they said, okay. They didn't like it too much, but I said, whatever. And about 2 months later, they gave me a contract, said, air traffic apprentice. I signed it real quick. There was also a bonus at the time. If I had stayed in a certain time, there was a reenlistment bonus of up to like $90,000.
Wow.
So that was motivating, yet it disappeared by the time I got out.
Oh, that's too bad.
But it's okay, so.
All right. And how did you decide that you wanted to be an air traffic controller?
So my story is it just kind of showed up. So I've been an airplane nut since I was a young kid, lifelong modeler.
You're amongst friends.
We're right. We're all the same, right? So after high school, was in college and dating my wife, who's my father-in-law was an air traffic controller, and just one night at their house, out in the garage, working on a car with them. He was working a mid shift. He said, "Hey, do you want to go?" Tagged along on a mid shift at Albuquerque Center, en route center. And from that point, walked in the door, was just enamored with it. It really kind of meshed my passions, and it took me 3 more years to get in at that point. So I've been significantly older than than my compatriots here to my side. So I got hired on the tail end of the hiring wave that came behind the strike when President Reagan fired all the controllers and the strike. And so the tail end of that hiring wave was when I got hired. So I've been about 33 years of air traffic control, and then now a couple years doing the regional administrator thing. So started out as an en route controller and have done that. I've been to our air traffic command center. I've worked in headquarters, regional offices, managed and been part of terminal and en route approach controls. So even had all the air traffic operations in the center third of the United States at one point. So.
Wow. So what is the training like for air traffic controllers?
For the en route guys, once you initially get hired, you have to go to the FAA Academy in Oak City. And I think it's like 4 months there now, because I think they make everybody do the basics course. So yeah, 3 to 4 months there. Then you'll, the way they're doing it now, you'll find out as you graduate what facility you're going to go to. You'll go to your facility and probably spend, I'd say 5 or 6 months just with classroom stuff, learning the specific procedures to the facility, the maps, all that kind of stuff, and then you will go into we have a simulator.
So like pilots have simulators,
Yeah.
air traffic controllers have simulators
Right.
for learning.
Yeah,
That
we
is
have a sim,
incredible.
too.
Okay.
So in the center, we have 2 positions. We have the R side, the radar side, and then we have what we call the D side, or the radar associate, who is the kind of the assistant to the radar guy. So you will learn all your radar associate stuff first. So you'll go through the simulator for that. Then you'll finally come to the control floor, and you'll be plugged in with an instructor for a couple hundred hours for each individual sector that's in your specific specialty.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been on the radio before, and I've heard, air traffic control give me something, and then all of a sudden somebody else jumps on, 5-1 whiskey, actually we're gonna, and so that's typically when they're training somebody.
Just
Okay.
like when a CFI jumps in on a student, it's
Yeah,
the same
exactly.
thing with us. We have an override key, and we can step over them. So on average, probably 2 to 3 years from the time you get hired until you're a fully certified controller in the
About
center
2
world.
years?
About 2 to 3, yeah.
2 to 3, okay. And then do you get to, so that's for the center world.
That's just center world.
Now, when you do that, do you have the option to move into a tower or go into like approach control or something?
You can, but I know typically, especially at Fort Worth Center, there's no really, unless you're just wanting a different view and whatever, there's no incentive to move. We're at the top of the pay band, and so most guys usually just stay, right there where you're at, especially after you've put in, a couple years of just getting training, and now you're finally released on your own. You just want to kind of just, see what you're made of and talk to airplanes for a while.
Okay. And you did your training though through the military. So what was that like?
Right, so after I went to basic back in 2009, they sent me to Keesler Air Force Base for about 3.5 months of air traffic training. I haven't been able to compare them compared to like the FAA Academy because I didn't go there, but what I hear is they're relatively close to being the same because it's an FAA approved course. So I did 3.5 months of that, and they didn't tell us exactly what we were doing in the military. They just said you're going to go through fundamentals. I went through radar fundamentals also, and I did radar sims. I've never worked a day of radar in my life, live radar, but I understand the basics. And then we went through a tower sim for about a month, and after that, after we graduated, they said, okay, you're going here. And I just got lucky, and I went to Florida, and then even then, they didn't tell us where until I actually got to the facilities, and they said, congratulations, you're going up top. Because at Tyndall, we had a tower and we had a RAPCON, which is a radar approach control. It's the same as a TRACON. So they didn't tell us until when I got there. They said, you're going up to the tower. I said, okay, great. And then the next guy that came in, you're going to the radar. You're going to the tower. And they shifted every now and then because the radar had a lot more people than the tower did. So I was in the tower at Tyndall from 2010 in May until June 2011 in training, and trained on 4 positions essentially, and took about a year, and we had a couple slowdowns. There was some times where they had the F-22s grounded, but we had a simulator there as well. It was a big,
wow,
it was a whole room simulator. So when we were slow, they would send us to the simulators.
What does one have to do to get into an ATC sim? I'm asking for a friend.
Go up to Oak City, knock on the door.
Ask the right person.
I think that would be really, really fun. Anyway.
Anyway, so yeah, it was a year of that, and then once I got certified, then I really started to learn. So
Right, of course.
and then the rest is history.
And I take it your training was probably very similar to Scott's.
Mine was. So you have two great examples of our two primary paths how we hire controllers. So the very basic piece, if somebody wants to be a controller, the first thing to do is to go out to usajobs.gov and look for an announcement. We typically are doing that about once a year now. The best place to keep an eye on that is through the FAA websites or on our social media. We just closed an announcement recently. But so that's the folks that have no experience. That's how they get in. So like what Matt described, we hire folks through what we call previous experience. So Matt had experience in the military. Those are our quickest certifications because they already have that experience. So he just had to learn the differences with FAA and that facility, local stuff.
That's a really good question. So how do you transition, I guess, from military to civilian, FAA?
I found it very easy because I worked at Class D tower, VFR tower in the Air Force. The only thing I'm doing different now is I'm doing things a little bit more higher volume but slower speed.
Okay.
In the military, it was lower volume but higher speed, so fighters. Not a lot of cargo guys. Mainly it was fighters, and then they had some F-16, F-4 drones that they would shoot off, and we didn't do too much with that. But I moved from that and having to, speak really fast to the civilian world where now I'm kind of talking a little bit slower, and especially the student pilots a lot slower.
Yes.
And
Student pilots appreciate that.
Very
word
slow.
to the wise, if you're a student pilot, which we all are, say student pilot. Anyways, and then I moved up to here, to where I'm at Meacham, and it only took me about 6 months to get certified here. They're all Class D towers. They all had, the second one had one runway, but Tyndall had two runways. I have two runways at Meacham. It's airport diagram and local airspace. That was pretty much the biggest thing I had to learn. And once I got in there and started working it didn't take me too long.
So let's say that you wanted, not that you want to, but if you wanted to go work at DFW, for example, like DFW Airport, what would that be like? Would you actually have to wait for a job position and transfer and train?
So the way it works for us is we submit what's called an ERR, and that's
Employee request for
That's
reassignment.
it. I knew what the RRs were. I forgot what the E was. We submit these basically stating that we would like to go to this place. And whenever the time comes and, there's an opening and they select you, it's also based on a point system. So
Sometimes guys will swap too.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can find somebody that wants to come here and you want to go there, and so you
Gotcha.
just swap out with them.
But you file the paperwork and then you sit and wait.
So what does the acceptance rate look like? I'm assuming that there are just tons of people out there that want to be air traffic controllers. And so I'm sure the FAA gets a flood of applications. What can one do to increase their chances of being accepted to go through the program?
Well, I can tell you about the initial piece that I described, applying for that initial application on USA Jobs. We get tens of thousands of applications at any one time. When it's in, like this last vacancy announcement was only open for about 2 weeks. And I think we got somewhere on the order of 16 or 18,000 folks interested in that. So we are very blessed with that because then that allows us to hire the cream of the crop, right? So the folks that are more competitive for us, there's some very basic requirements that you have to pass on that initial piece, and those are to have either a combination of 3 years of full-time work experience, 4 years of college, or a combination. Things that can have you rise above some of the competition is some of the specialized experience. If you have a pilot license, if you have multiple ratings as a pilot, if you have a dispatcher rating, if you've flown in the military or air traffic in the military, even though those aren't FAA ratings, those in essence, not really count extra, but those are increased qualifications that make it a little bit easier for you to adapt, so those folks rise up a little bit. But it's a very competitive process. And then off that initial piece, folks may be offered the opportunity to take what we call the air traffic skills assessment, and that's just an exam that assesses your ability to learn the things peculiar about air traffic control. And so experience as a pilot or as a dispatcher, whatever, really helps you answer that as well.
Okay.
And then from there, that's where we offer you the opportunity when we have vacancies to go to Oklahoma City to the academy that you heard described earlier.
Wow. Is there an age limitation for applying to be an air traffic controller?
31.
Unless you have military time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If you have military time, I believe it's 35.
Correct.
So
Gotcha.
if you're a veteran, then you have until 35. I think you have to be referred by your 35th birthday.
Okay.
And that's because we have to retire at 56.
Right.
So-
There's a lower. And is it because it's just the nature of the job, the stress, the low lighting?
I guess so. That's just the rules that are in place.
It's similar to an FBI agent at the early retirement, and it's driven, like Scott said, it's really the 20 years backwards from the age 56, and then 25 years gives you 31. So.
Gotcha. That makes sense. You brought up earlier that Fort Worth Center's top of the pay band. I'm going to go there and I'm going to ask, what is the pay like for air traffic controllers? Is it a good competitive position?
Well, I could tell you just coming in, and I'll let these guys talk about where they make. So when you very first are hired and we send you to the academy and you go to your first facility, the salaries average between $25,000 and $31,000 initially, but that's only in that very first piece. The salaries significantly increase quickly depending on the facility you went to, the size and complexity of it, and how fast you make it through. So as you progress through training, your salary increases, and then Scott, I'll let you talk about facilities are pay rate is based on the complexity and the size of what they work and what they do.
Yeah, so controls, we used to be on the GS scale, and then I don't know how many years ago we moved. We have our own air traffic scale now, and so it's based off of facility levels. So 12, I think it goes, 4 to 12 now is what the range is. Most of your centers are 10, 11, 12, which is the top of the pay band, and then it's your towers and your approach controls, like you said, depends on complexity and stuff, like where you fall in level-wise. Everybody makes the same. As soon as you graduate the academy, I think it's at $40,000 now. When you graduate the academy, you go to that at the academy grad band. And then it just depends on how, like for my facility, once you get to that initial 6 months I told you about, you'll get another pay bump. When you get to radar associate positions, you get another pay bump. You get one more when you get all your radar associates, and then you get another one when you get 2 R sides, and then your last one when you fully certify. So there's several steps along the way to get you from 40 up to a level 12. I think now is a little over $100,000 for starting off CPC pay.
Okay. What do you think the top out pay is?
Well, we're all congressionally capped, just like any other federal employees. So
Gotcha.
I think it's at 193 or something right now.
193.
But
That's a livable wage.
yeah, but to get there, you'd have to have 20-something, years in and be working your way up there. So.
Right. I have one final question. Is there an air traffic controller shortage, like there is this pilot shortage that people keep talking about? I've been hearing rumors that there is an air traffic controller shortage.
I think in the bigger picture
Yeah.
there is, but in certain places, maybe not so much. But I think that'd be more of a Rob question.
So I'll tell you, I think we've been through a big hiring phase. I described earlier that I got hired on the tail end of the strike recovery. My generation now, for the most part, is retiring or has retired, and so we have these cyclic,
Right.
hiring. So we're on the tail end of that. We've been hiring for the last 5 years at significant rates. We've turned over our workforce generationally. We have about 70% of it turned over now to newer generation folks that are there, and we are continually evaluating what our vacancies are. And so there's a lot of, when they described, transferring on the employee request for reassignment, there's a whole process that defines how many spots are allocated to a given facility, how many folks are there, who is eligible to retire, who is expected to go, who's in training, and we've calculated over time how the rates at which they complete training, the rate at which they retire. And so a lot of that is projections, because to be eligible to retire and having to retire are often sometimes different things.
Right.
So Scott talked about we have to retire controllers at 56, but in between you may be eligible to retire before that if you got in early enough. So some of that is a guess, but overall we're running at about an 80% staffing rate across the country right now.
Wow.
We have close to 93% in the pipeline. We have a lot of developmental still in the pipeline, but we have a huge chunk of our workforce is still eligible to retire and can go out the door. So we have a lot of risk, like they've described. That's very much on our minds, and we are very dependent on Congress and others to fund our ability to continue to hire, depending on budgets as they go from administration to administration and year to year. We can't always hire like we've been able to for the last few years.
Right. Well, thank you guys so much for the information. It was incredibly helpful, and I learned a lot today. Air traffic control indeed does sound like a pretty awesome career path for those of you guys that are interested. Again, check out the FAA's website and if you want some more information. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the hangar.